Now this is the third day, and today we'll be talking about liberation by using the laws of material nature. The first day, we spoke about the need to study about the modes, how they work, how they interact. The second day, we discussed about the three primary characteristics which Srila Prabhupada described in the purport and are there in the 14th chapter. What the modes are, how they act, and how they bind. And I didn't get the details. Someone can give me the details. And and today we'll read about how one uses the modes of material nature to achieve liberation. And for those who came a little late or weren't there at other meetings, I will just read. This is from the purport to 14.1, where Krishna says, Param Bhuya Rakshani Jnana Jnana and so on. He says, again I shall declare to you the supreme wisdom, the best of all knowledge, knowing which all the stages have attained the supreme perfection. And here in the purport, Srila Prabhupada presented very cogent, as usually, information, but also some very startling information. This was startling for me when I read it. Once when I first read it, because I first read it, I didn't notice it. Later on, Prabhupada says in the 13th chapter, it was clearly explained that by humbly developing knowledge, one may possibly be freed from material entanglement. It has also been explained that it is due to the modes of material nature of the living entities entangled in this material world. Then Prabhupada says, now in this chapter, the Supreme Personality explains what those modes of nature are, how they act, how they bind, and how they give liberation. It's this point which is the topic of today's talk, how the modes of material nature give liberation. And generally we don't consider the modes in that light, that one actually uses the modes of material nature for achieving liberation. And Prabhupada then goes on saying that knowledge explained in this chapter is proclaimed by the Supreme Lord to be superior to the knowledge given so far in other chapters. By understanding this knowledge, various great sages attain perfection and transfer to the spiritual world. The Lord now explains the same knowledge in a better way. This knowledge is far, far superior to all other processes of knowledge thus far explained, and knowing this, many attain perfection. Thus, it is expected that one who understands this 14th chapter will attain perfection. And that's really the goal of this seminar, to get a better understanding of the 14th chapter, or preferably understand it, and in that way perhaps we can also achieve perfection. However, here, very important thing, how the modes give liberation. And today, let's talk about just that. How the modes of material nature give liberation. It may be a perplexing thing that which binds us to this world can also be the source of liberation. However, it's the truth. I thought Prabhupada said it. It's really the truth. The question is, how is that the case? And when we study the 14th chapter, we get some hints, especially when we study 11th canto, as I mentioned, 13th chapter, 25th chapter. There, Krishna says the same thing that he's told Arjuna. He's saying it's Uddhava, but there he clarifies how the mode of goodness becomes the instrument for liberation. So, in this whole approach, we can see that with a proper vision or a proper perspective of things, one can then direct one's own life, or directed path upon which we are approaching liberation. One has to know what is the path of liberation. And in order to have a vision for achieving that, one requires appropriate knowledge. So in the 19th chapter, the 19th verse of this chapter, Krishna has said, Nanya gunebhya kartaram yada drishtam pashyati. Here he says, when one properly sees that in all activities no other performance is at work than these modes of nature. In other words, Krishna here is emphasizing that there's such a thing as proper vision. And he says that proper vision is such that in all activities, everywhere, permeating throughout the material world, up, down, horizontally, all activities, all people, as we've described earlier, is quoted in the 11th canto, whether seen, heard, or conceived of in the mind, everything is enacted by the modes of material nature. And Krishna here is saying that one should properly see the modes of nature at work. Prabhupada also says this on several occasions, that a devotee should actually be able to see how the modes are acting. Now what does that mean? It means that, like you put on some glasses, X-ray glasses, and you're able to see the modes of material nature. No, it's not some kind of trick. It means that you're able to see how the modes of material nature are working by dint of knowledge. How do you know what a knife is meant for? How do you know that a knife is not a Q-tip that you're supposed to clean your ears with? Because you're educated. You know the proper utility of things. So on the basis of knowledge, one is able to change one's vision, and one is able to see how things are working. So Krishna says this need of proper vision, which is also contained in the 11th verse of this same chapter. He says, how and when does this proper seeing take place? He says, quote, when the manifestations of the mode of goodness can be experienced, when all the gates of the body are illuminated by knowledge. This is also sometimes a bit of a mysterious or mystical statement. Gates of the body illuminated by knowledge. How do the gates of the body become illuminated by knowledge? Prabhupada explains in the purport. A person who hears things in the proper way, a person who sees things in the proper way, a person who speaks and is able to express himself in the proper way. This means that things are directed by knowledge. A person, what does it mean? How does gates of knowledge go to do, for instance, with evacuation? Illuminated by knowledge. Because if one knows how to eat, then all the functionings of the body, even when one is evacuating, it will also be done in the proper way because it's done on the basis of knowledge. But as soon as you do anything outside of knowledge, then no longer any more illumination. But instead of illumination, one becomes more and more covered. So, what's being highlighted here is that a person in the mode of goodness, by being properly situated in knowledge, which is the main characteristic of goodness. When we read 14th chapter, we have our chart. The main characteristic of goodness is knowledge. And remember, this is a very important factor, because very often, for instance, we have misconceptions about people in the mode of goodness. As I mentioned last time, for instance, someone's very humble, speaks very slowly, sort of appears, has a kindly demeanor, we say this person is in the mode of goodness. He may not have the slightest idea about the difference between the body and the soul, not have any inkling about whether there's even such a thing as God, and yet we say he's in the mode of goodness. Obviously, someone makes a statement like that isn't in the mode of goodness. Because it's not a matter of how someone is moving and how someone is acting. And so the main characteristic is what knowledge is that person situated in. And does knowledge determine that person's activities, or is he simply reacting to the influence of his nature and the modes themselves? So a person in goodness sees the modes working. And what is the benefit of seeing the modes working? It's not just some kind of light and sound show that you're just observing, but it allows you to avoid lower modes. Just like when you're walking somewhere. Recently I was just driving across the Peak District. So when people are hiking, they choose a path. They avoid the dangerous path. They avoid the one that leads down a ravine or something that's going to take them to a river that they can't cross over, and they take the path that leads them to their destination. Which means that you have a map, you see which are all the alternate paths that are spread out in different directions, and you know what are the pitfalls of those paths. Same way, if one knows the mode of passion, the mode of ignorance, sees how they're working, says, this is not beneficial. What's ignorance? It's going to lead me to foolishness. Passion is simply going to lead me to suffering. Therefore I avoid those. So when one can see all the modes of material nature functioning, then one can actually choose between them. And this is, as is stated in the 6th verse of this chapter, is that goodness is illuminating and purifying. So it is the right platform from which to practice devotion, because devotion is that which will bring one to the transcendental platform. So here our premise of today's talk is that by cultivating goodness, one achieves liberation through the practice of devotional service. And this is the explanation briefly of what Prabhupada means, liberation through using the modes of nature. One has to cultivate knowledge, be able to discriminate between the modes, know that passion and ignorance do not lead to the right path. Goodness is what actually brings us to the proper foundation, to the proper platform, upon which when we cultivate devotional service, we come to the platform of transcendence. So a question really arises here at this point, which is not a new one. Put open the door, that'll be a little more trash. And that is, can a person in the modes choose? Has he actually got a choice? Have you got a free choice when you're in the modes of material nature? Now generally, we give the answer, well, there's only one choice you can make. That's between Krishna and Maya, which seems to indicate that you can only choose either to be transcendental or be in the modes of material nature. Now that's a very extreme understanding of that statement. But those things which lead you to Krishna are also choosing between Krishna and Maya. And Maya is that which is taking you away from Krishna. So if you choose those modes that take you away from Krishna, that's Maya. But you may be choosing those modes or that decision which brings you closer to Krishna. And that decision may be to make a step from ignorance to passion, or from passion to goodness. It doesn't necessarily mean that simply making a step towards Krishna is a wrong thing, even if it means simply a higher mode. So one can actually, if one is in the modes, one can choose to act in another way. Just as by association, we had this, oops, I need my chart again. Vandar, can you get the chart? Just as we were discussing the last time about how the modes bind, and there's a really wonderful example that Krishna was giving, and we went through that flow chart of how the process of association is what binds us to this material world. In the same way as association we're influenced by the modes through association. Similarly, by association of sadhus, one can be freed of the association of the modes, and then one can actually choose. When we say sadhus, that means by sadhus you get knowledge. So as you acquire knowledge, knowledge gives you the power to discriminate, and it gives you the power to choose. And that knowledge doesn't have to be that you're in perfect and total knowledge. It means that you may be in knowledge of your current situation and what a better situation is, and therefore one can improve from a lower status to a higher. Now let's back this up with some quotes. In the second canto, 9th chapter of Srimad Bhagavatam, Prabhupada says, the external material energy is represented by her three modes, namely goodness, passion, and ignorance. So, even in the material nature, there is a chance of an independent choice by the living entity. And according to his choice, the material energy offers him different varieties of material bodies. So I repeat, Prabhupada here says that even in the material nature, there is a chance of an independent choice by the living entity. And how that choosing takes place is, Prabhupada will explain it in this next purport in the 17th chapter of the Gita, is by association. One gains knowledge through association, and that association allows one, that knowledge allows one to make a choice. Prabhupada says, but this nature, which means one's conditioned nature, this is in the second verse of the 17th chapter, can be changed but if one associates with a bona fide spiritual master and abides by his rules and scriptures. Gradually, one can change his position from ignorance to goodness or from passion to goodness. The conclusion is that blind faith in a particular mode of nature cannot help a person become elevated to the perfectional stage. Now, Prabhupada says, this is just taking things a little further, he says, one has to consider things carefully and with intelligence in the association of a bona fide spiritual master. Thus, one can change his position to a higher mode of nature. Prabhupada is really saying a lot of things here. These are very important statements. Prabhupada is making this point is, yes, one can change one's nature by association. Why? He says, association by spiritual master and abides by his rules in the scriptures. It means by receiving transcendental knowledge. And then he says, gradually, you can change your nature from ignorance, passion, up to goodness. Then he introduces some other thing, which I'll refer to later. So you can just put that to us. Thank you. He says, how do you do this? He says, one should consider things carefully. Now, how often do we consider things carefully? Consider what we do carefully. Consider the conclusion of Shastra carefully. Consider how to apply knowledge that we've received from devotees, from Gita, from Guru, from Srila Prabhupada very carefully. And he says, consider things carefully with intelligence. Thank you. And in the association of bona fide spiritual master. In this way, change your position to a higher mode of nature. Prabhupada doesn't say this way you become transcendental. He says you change your position to a higher mode of nature, which is what we're saying. You go from a lower mode to a higher mode. But in between, Prabhupada makes this nice statement. He says the conclusion, which it's more like a intrusion rather than a conclusion, because it's somewhat different from, it's not the direct conclusion of what he's saying up to now, but it's indirect. What he's saying is that blind faith in a particular mode of nature cannot help a person become elevated to the perfectional platform. So this is a type of misconception. That misconception is that one has absolutely no choice. That whatever you do, you're just being forced to act in a particular mode. And you don't need to make any particular effort. You just have blind faith in a particular mode. You practice Krishna consciousness in that mode and something will happen. May happen, but Prabhupada says that it cannot, he says, blind faith in mode cannot help a person become elevated to a perfectional stage. In other words, if one's simply just depending, I just float along wherever I am and chant Hare Krishna without making an effort, without doing what Prabhupada says here, changing one's nature, association with devotees, considering things carefully with intelligence and association. So he's giving the inverse. He says if you don't do this, you can't become elevated.